The Psychology of Money *. Edward Miller was 65 years old when he finally understood that his relationship with money had nothing to do with money at all. He was sitting in his financial advisor's office looking at numbers that should have made him feel secure when the realization washed over him. He had $3 million in savings, a paid-off house, a pension that would cover all his needs. But he still felt terrified of running out. You are more than comfortable at his advisor. Janet was saying, you could retire tomorrow and live very well. But Edward could not shake the anxiety that lived in his chest whenever he thought about money, the fear that it would all disappear, that he would end up with nothing, that he would be that scared boy again, because that was the truth. Edward had been avoiding for 65 years, Relationship with money was not about his current bank account, It was about being 8 years old and hearing his parents fight, about the electricity. Being shut off, about his father losing another job. About his mother crying in the kitchen over bills she could not paid where it had grown up poor. Not the romantic kind of poor that people talked about nostalgically, but the kind where you wore shoes with holes in them to school, where dinner was sometimes just bread and butter, where Christmas meant nothing under the tree, and trying to pretend you did not care, money had meant safety, rather the lack of it had meant danger, and that lesson had carved itself deep into Edward's 8-year-old heart, I had promised himself he would never be poor again, never feel that helpless fear, never watch someone he loved cry over money, so he had worked harder than anyone around him, he got a scholarship to college and worked 3 jobs to cover what the scholarship did not. He lived on nothing, saved everything, climbed the corporate ladder with single-minded determination. By 30, he was doing well. By 40, he was wealthy, by 50, he was very wealthy, but he had never stopped being afraid. His wife Anne had tried to talk to him about it for years. We have enough, Ed, she would say gently. We have more than enough, but enough was a concept Edward could not grasp, because in his mind, enough was always one disaster away from nothing. Anne had wanted to travel to donate to causes they believed in, to help their children buy their first homes, but Edward had resisted every expense that was not absolutely necessary, he had told himself. He was being responsible, being prudent, being smart, but the truth was, he was being controlled by an 8-year-old's fear, that truth had hit him in Janet's office with unexpected force, he drove home in silence, thinking about all the years he had wasted being afraid, all the experiences he had denied himself, and all the joy he had postponed indefinitely. That evening he found an in the garden. She was 63 and still beautiful to him. Still patient after 40 years of marriage, still waiting for him to stop running from ghosts, I need to tell you something, Edward said, Anne looked up from her roses. What is it? I have been living my whole life from a place of fear, and it has cost us so much, Anne set down her gardening shears and gave him her full attention, Edward told her about being 8 years old, about the fear that had never left him, about how every dollar saved had been an attempt to outrun his childhood. I know, Anne said gently. Edward looked at her with surprise. No, I have always known, she said. I just did not know how to help you see it, They sat together in the garden as the sun began to set. What do you want to do? And Tedworth thought about this. He said, because we do, yes, and agreed we do the next week. Edward made an appointment with a therapist, Dr. Thomas. Green was in his 70s and semi-righted, Tell me about money, Dr. Green said. In their first session, Edward talked about his childhood, about the fear, about how he had spent 65 years trying to build a wall high enough to keep poverty out, Money became your proxy for safety, Dr. Green observed, and no amount would ever be enough because you were trying to solve an emotional problem with a financial solution. Edward had never thought of it that way. But it made perfect sense, He had been trying to cure childhood trauma with a bank account, trying to heal emotional wounds with investments. It had never worked. It could never work. What would safety actually look like for you? Dr. Green asked. Edward considered this carefully. I think he said slowly, it would look like trusting that I can handle whatever comes asterisk. Not that nothing bad will happen, but that you could survive if it did exactly and do you believe that? Edward thought about everything he had survived growing up poor asterisk, working his way through college, building a career, navigating setbacks and challenges asterisk. He had survived all of it. Yes, he said with surprise. I do believe that over the following months Edward worked on changing his relationship with money asterisk. It was harder than he expected. 65 years of fear did not disappear overnight, but he started small asterisk. He and Anne booked a trip to Italy, something she had wanted to do for 20 years. Edward felt anxious as he paid for the tickets asterisk, but he did it anyway. The trip was wonderful, not because of the places they saw, but because Edward was finally present, not worrying about what the trip cost, not calculating what else they could have done with the money, just experiencing the joy of being with his wife in a beautiful place. Asterisk. This is what I wanted, Anne said as they stood in a plaza in Rome, just two. See you enjoying life instead of defending against it. Edward understood what she meant. He had spent his whole life in a defensive crouch asterisk. Ready for disaster, guarding against loss, he had never relaxed enough to actually enjoy what he had built asterisk. When they returned home, Edward sat down with his children asterisk. Susan was 38 and Daniel was 35. Both were doing well, but both were also struggling with housing costs in an expensive city. I want to help you both buy homes, Edward said, asterisk Susan. And Daniel exchanged surprised glances. Their father had never been generous with money. Not because he was selfish, but because he was afraid asterisk. Dad, you do not have to do that, Susan said. Asterisk, I know. I do not have to. Edward replied, but I want to, and I can afford it. He explained what he had learned about his relationship with money, about how his childhood had shaped his fears asterisk, about how he was working to change asterisk. I do not want to die with millions in the bank and regret that I never used it. To make your lives easier, he said. Daniel looked emotional. That means a lot. Dad, there is one condition, Edward added. What is that asterisk? That you both work on your own relationships with money, so you do not pass down the same fears to your kids. Asterisk both. Children agreed. Helping his children felt good, but it also felt terrifying asterisk. Edward had to sit with the anxiety, had to remind himself that he still had plenty, that he was safe, that giving did not mean losing. He and Anne also started donating regularly to the food bank in their community. Asterisk the first check, Edward wrote, made his hands shake. It was not a huge amount, but it represented something he had never done. Asterisk giving money away on purpose. Asterisk, this is hard for you, and observed as he sealed the envelope. Asterisk, yes. Edward admitted it feels reckless asterisk. It is not reckless, Anne said gently. It is generous, and we can afford to be generous. Edward had to learn to trust that each month the donation got a little easier. Asterisk Edward also started working with Dr. Green on the deeper issues, on learning that his worth was not tied to his net worth, that he was valuable regardless of what he owned asterisk. That safety came from within, not from a bank account asterisk. You survived poverty as a child, Dr. Green said, and that taught you that you are resourceful, that you can endure hardship, that you have strength asterisk, but I have been living like I am still that helpless 8-year-old, Edward said asterisk too. Yes, Dr. Green agreed, and the work now is to integrate what you know as an adult with what you felt as a child. Edward began to notice his patterns, how he checked his bank balance multiple times a day asterisk, how he agonized over small purchases asterisk. He felt physically anxious when spending money, even on necessities. He started challenging these behaviors. Buying something without checking the price first, asterisk going a day without looking at his accounts, asterisk treating himself and Anne to small luxuries. Without guilty, his anxiety would spike, and each time he would survive it asterisk. Donald was 90 now, and in a care facility that Edward paid for asterisk. They had never talked about Edward's childhood, about the poverty, about the fear. Asterisk, Dad, Edward said. I need to ask you something. Donald looked at his son with watery eyes. What is it? Do you remember how hard things were when I was young? How poor we were? Donald's face fell asterisk. Every day, he said quietly. Every single day I remember asterisk. It scared me. Edward admitted it shaped my whole life asterisk. I am sorry, Donald said, and his voice cracked. I tried so hard, but I could not seem to keep a job, and your mother and I, we did our best asterisk, Edward. Felt tears in his eyes asterisk. I know you did, Dad. I am not blaming you then. What are you saying? I am saying I let that fear control me for 65 years, and I am finally learning to let it go asterisk. Donald reached across the table and took Edward's hand asterisk. Good, he said. Do not waste your life being afraid like I did. Yes, Dr. Green agreed. And the work now is to integrate what you know as an adult with what you felt as a child. Edward began to notice his patterns, how he checked his bank balance multiple times a day. Asterisk.
Hours.
How he agonized over small purchases. Asterisk. How he felt physically anxious when spending money, even on necessities. He started challenging these behaviors. Buying something without checking the price first. Asterisk. Going a day without looking at his accounts. Asterisk. Treating himself and Anne to small luxuries. Without guilty. Each time his anxiety would spike, and each time he would survive it. Asterisk. One afternoon, Edward and his father had coffee. Asterisk. His father. Donald was 90 now, and in a care facility that Edward paid for. Asterisk. They had never talked about Edward's childhood, about the poverty, about the fear. Asterisk. Dad, Edward said. I need to ask you something. Donald looked at his son with watery eyes. What is it? Do you remember how hard things were when I was young? How poor we were? Donald's face fell. Asterisk. Every day, he said quietly. Every single day I remember asterisk. It scared me. Edward admitted it shaped my whole life. Asterisk. I am sorry, Donald said, and his voice cracked. I tried so hard, but I could not seem to keep a job, and your mother and I, we did our best. Asterisk. Edward felt tears in his eyes. Asterisk. I know you did, Dad. I am not blaming you then. What are you saying? I am saying. Donald reached across the table and took Edward's hand. Good, he said. Do not waste your life being afraid like I did too. Edward realized his father had carried his own shame about their poverty, his own fear about not providing. They had both been trapped by it. Asterisk. But it was not too late to be free. Edward was 65 years old. He had spent most of his life being controlled by money, or rather by the fear of not having it. He had built wealth as a fortress against childhood poverty. Asterisk. But the fortress had also been a prison now. He was learning to step outside, to use his resources for joy instead of just security. Asterisk. To give generously instead of hoarding fearfully, to trust that he would be okay. He and Anne celebrated their 41st anniversary with a dinner at an expensive restaurant. Asterisk. Edward did not look at the prices on the menu. Asterisk. Did not calculate what the meal cost, just enjoyed the food and the wine in his wife's company. Is nice, Anne. Said it as Edward agreed. You seem different. She observed. Lighter. Asterisk. I feel lighter, Edward said, like I have been carrying something heavy my whole life. And I finally put it down. Money, Anne said. Fear, Edward corrected. Asterisk. This is a story about how money is never just about money. Asterisk. It is about the stories we tell ourselves, the wounds we carry, the safety we seek. Asterisk. Edward's relationship with money had been shaped by childhood poverty, by watching his parents struggle, by learning that money meant survival. Asterisk. And for 65 years he had been trying to earn enough to finally feel safe. Asterisk. But safety does not come from a number in an account. Asterisk. It comes from trusting yourself, from knowing you can handle whatever comes, from understanding that you are more than your net worth had $3 million. But what he really needed was to believe he would be okay, even if he had nothing. Asterisk. Because he had survived nothing before, and he was strong enough to do it again, though he hoped he would not have to. Asterisk. Edward was learning to live from abundance instead of scarcity, to give instead of hoard, to enjoy instead of defer. Asterisk. And in doing so he was finally truly wealthy, not because of what he owned, but because of how he lived. Asterisk. Free from fear, rich in experience, generous in spirit. Asterisk. Finally enough